Welcome back to the Point. We're going to go straight to our guest, Minister for Energy, Minister for Environment, Josh Frydenberg, joining us out of Canberra. Minister, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Nice to be with you.
Thanks for your company, Josh Frydenberg. Look, this is unbelievable. You used to work for the great former Prime Minister John Howard. You understand the importance of those gun laws. Why wouldn't Malcolm Turnbull rule it out in that interview, and why won't you resign from the front bench? Because you, I know, on principle, wouldn't be willing to be part of a government that did that.
Well, Malcolm Turnbull's comments this morning were absolutely appropriate, and what he was saying was that, you know, one of the great achievements of John Howard's government were the laws that he put in place post the Port Arthur massacre, and he has no intention to change those strong gun laws. But what he said, he wasn't going to negotiate with the crossbenchers through the media, which is also a very reasonable point to make. So I think the Labor Party is beating this up, and it's very upsetting that they are doing it, given the importance of our gun laws and given Australia's success. And in fact, the Turnbull government is ploughing over $100 million of new money into improving forensic analysis, anti-gang activity, being able to stop more of these illegal trafficking of firearms on our borders, and obviously by continuing with this prohibition on the importation of the Adler gun with more than a 5-capacity round is a good decision by the government.
Josh Frydenberg, you mentioned that, you know, it's disappointing that Labor are playing politics with this, as you just put it, given the importance of our gun laws. Isn't that also a reason to be disappointed that the Prime Minister didn't just rule it out when asked 5 times on morning radio whether there'd be any changes to gun laws, given, as you put it, the importance of our gun laws?
I think, look, the Prime Minister's comments were absolutely appropriate. He didn't actually say that he was going to change our gun laws, and people are reading way too much into this. In fact, he's just made a statement, as you know, in the Parliament, where he's made it very clear that we are not for weakening our gun laws. In fact, it's the Labor Party, Peter, who now will have to answer why didn't they support our proposals to put in place mandatory minimum sentences for the illegal trafficking of guns twice in the last Parliament, and we'll be trying again in this Parliament.
All right, Minister Frydenberg, let's move on to your portfolio, because I know you've got a limited amount of time with us. In the aftermath of the South Australian blackouts, you called on the states and territories to work with the Commonwealth to harmonise, as you put it, renewable energy targets. Are you talking about something as simple as everybody having the same target at 23% by 2020, say? Or are you talking about the states and territories setting targets that reflect the national scheme? Is it as simple as just everyone get on the same page with the same number?
Yeah, I mean, I would prefer, Kristina, if we just had one target and that was the national target, because what we're hearing from groups like the Grattan Institute...
Sorry, just to clarify, you mean that the jurisdictions themselves, individual jurisdictions, wouldn't set their own targets? There would just be one overarching national target?
Look, I certainly think that's preferable, because what you're getting, Kristina, from these state-based targets is the skewing of investment decisions. That's not my view. That's what we've heard around the COAG table from the Australian Energy Market Commission. That's what the Grattan Institute have talked about in their commentary on state-based targets, and indeed in Queensland, which have adopted a crazy 50% by 2030 renewable energy target, given they only have currently 4.5% renewable energy generation. They have heard from their own Queensland Productivity Commission that says that they should work through COAG as opposed to pursue unilateral approaches. So I think a federal target, which is a realistic one, which is the one we have, 23.5% by 2020 is the way to go, not these Labor state government targets, which are very unrealistic and which will compromise energy security and affordability.
But just to think about this in terms of what's achievable, how would you actually impose something like that? The states have the right to set a target. They actually do run the energy infrastructure in their own states.
How would you know that? Oh, of course. Sorry, you're a former premier. So yeah, how do you do that?
How do you do it?
The answer is you can't enforce it. You have to seek agreement around the COAG energy ministers' table, and that's what we are trying to do with the various discussions that we are having, because we reached a significant agreement at the last meeting just over a week ago, where ministers agreed that their primary responsibility was reliability of the energy system after the blackout in South Australia, where 1.7 million people lost their power. And it has reminded us all what is our principal and primary responsibility. And the problem with these high renewable energy targets is that they're introducing into the system more intermittent power, namely solar power and wind power. So when the wind's not blowing or the sun's not shining, power's not being generated.
But Minister, don't targets need to be enforceable? Don't they need to be enforceable? Otherwise, what's the point?
Well, the problem with these targets is that in the state of Victoria and now in Queensland, they're talking about the state governments underwriting a certain price for that renewable energy to be generated. It's called contracting for difference. And the problem with that is that will skew investment decisions. So the best place to put a solar plant may be in Western Australia, not in Victoria, but because of the incentives that are being proposed in Victoria, that it may lead to a skewing of those investment decisions.
But if they're not going to adhere to the targets, your 2020 target of 23% renewable energy, it's meaningless, isn't it? If it can't be enforced, it's meaningless.
No, what can't be enforced is the federal government overriding the states and saying, drop your state-based targets. We do have a mandated, legislated 23.5% renewable energy target. That's in legislation. And currently we're at 15%. It's going to be a stretch to get there by 2020.
OK, so you would agree...
we can't, as a federal government...
So you would agree that enforceable targets are the only targets that matter?
Well, what I would agree is that the state-based targets are unrealistic, and we, as the federal government, Peter, can't enforce them to drop it. So we have to use the powers of persuasion and to talk about the importance of the stability of the system, which is being driven home to all the energy ministers in light of what happened in South Australia.
But the targets that you set, you consider it important that they can be enforced?
And they are, because they're legislated and because we are issuing renewable energy certificates, and there's money behind that, and that's creating an incentive for these investments. The states can try to enforce their own state-based targets by contracting for difference and underwriting it, but the reality is we as a federal government can't force them to drop their own state-based targets.
But if you do, though, in essence, in something that you can control, think that enforceable targets is what matters, how do you enforce gender targets, which the government's looking at?
Sorry, gender targets?
Yeah, well, the Liberal Party's got gender targets, apparently, but they're completely unenforceable.
No, well, I mean, the gender targets are a completely different debate, and, you know, I think...
What, because gender doesn't matter, but the environment does? I mean,
I think this is a very quirky type of analogy you're trying to draw here, Peter, and not sure where you're going.
Well, I'll ask you another one.
The reality is...
I'll ask you another one. You're in charge of both energy...
The reality is we do need more women in Parliament.
You're in charge
of... Sure.
But maybe setting an enforceable target would achieve it.
Well, like you're achieving your renewable energy targets. Anyway, that's another debate.
Well, we'll leave that to the Labor Party.
Here's one for you. You're in charge of both...
They've done it.
Well, you're in charge of both energy and environment. If you can only save one,
yes.
Which one would you save?
Well, both are indispensable to our way of life, dealing with and protecting our environment as well as energy policy. And it has to be said, Peter, that the machinery of government change that Malcolm Turnbull has presided over by bringing these two portfolios together has been very well received. But I think the point I want to emphasise, and you'll hear a lot more about this in the Parliament over coming days and weeks, is that the Labor Party, the federal Labor Party, has a 50% renewable energy target by 2030. They have no detail out there. In fact, their election document says that they will provide the detail in October 2017. We know from Bloomberg Energy Finance that it will cost upwards of $48 billion to get there. It's going to lead to 10,000 wind turbines. I don't know where they are going to be put. And even the elder statesmen of the Labor Party, like Graham Richardson, have come out and condemned their policy and said it's playing roulette with people's lives. So it's up to Bill Shorten and Mark Butler to face the truth about their target and accept that they were wrong and adopt something which is a lot more reasonable and which will not compromise energy security or affordability.
Let me ask you really quickly. You also talk a lot about energy security. You talked there about needing detail. How much is it going to cost for us to achieve energy security across the nation to ensure that the lights don't go out again as they did in South Australia? How much would that cost?
Well, the answer to that is there's no silver bullet. It's going to require a range of different approaches and new systems that we discussed at the COAG meeting. For example, hardening some of the infrastructure to deal with extreme weather events. You see, in South Australia, they didn't have their transmission towers at the same strength that you've seen, for example, in Queensland, where they can withstand Category 5 cyclones. We've also heard about the need for more interconnectors, and New South Wales and South Australia are starting to talk about the possibility of that, but that will cost money.
Minister. That all sounds very expensive.
It is.
Who's going to bear the cost of that? A lot of this is private sector companies. Is it going to be the government subsidising it? Is it going to be consumers having to pay more for their electricity?
Well, it depends on the technologies that you are using, but for example, with interconnectors, what the companies inevitably do is they approach the Australian Energy Regulator through a regulated process called the RIT-T process, and they agree on a sum of money that can then be recouped from the customer. So ultimately, it's the taxpayer or the consumer that does pay for the strengthening and the hardening of the system. But our clear message is, if you pursue greater amounts of intermittent energy into the system, Kristina, then that does raise serious questions about reliability. And we've seen that in not just in the South Australian blackout, but we've seen it, as recently as July in South Australia, when there was huge volatility in the wholesale spot price for electricity. And these are the questions that the energy ministers have to find answers for. We have to proceed carefully, we have to dispense with ideology, and we have to put energy security first.
Do you consider, just on the last question around this whole debate around David Leyonhjelm, not on the whole, did the PM rule out or not rule out gun reforms, but one person who made it very plain that the only way he supports ABCC changes is if gun laws are amended, and that's clearly not happening now. The Prime Minister has ruled that out. Are you guys one vote down now in the Senate? Because David Leyonhjelm has made it pretty clear that he's not going to support ABCC legislative change.
Well, that's really a question for Keneally Cash, who's been delivering the detail of that policy and also the discussions with the crossbenchers. But I don't think you should be trading on the ABCC for, in David Leyonhjelm's case, for changes to gun laws. I mean, last night I turned on my television and I watched bowling for Columbine, and that was a terrible massacre in that state of America, and I saw a father standing behind a photo of his son who had tragically been killed in Columbine. Now, what we've done in Australia with stronger gun laws has been a real credit to the coalition. John Howard, and now upheld by Tony Abbott and Malcolm Turnbull. We have to continue with that policy going forward. Malcolm Turnbull strongly supports gun laws. It's the Labor Party who are beating up this issue. It's David Leyonhjelm who's asking us to trade, and I think that's an irresponsible decision on his behalf. I think the ABCC stands on its merits. We have heard time and time again the need for a cop on the beat in the construction sector, and the productivity gains and the economic gains that have been derived from the ABCC. That should stand on its own 2 feet, and it shouldn't be discussed in the same breath as gun laws, which David Leyonhjelm is trying to do.
Tony Abbott said that he found it disturbing that there was horse trading on gun laws. Would you agree?
But there's no horse trading. I mean,
but there was when Tony Abbott was Prime Minister. I mean, he actually almost uses the word horse trading. Laura Jay's read out what he said back then at the time. He was willing to do horse trading on gun laws, and in fact did do horse trading on gun laws, and now he's tweeted that it's disturbing to see horse trading in the here and now. What do you think of that?
Well, look, there are issues that you can ask Tony Abbott about, but I'm just focused on the government today.
They're fair questions for you, Josh Frydenberg. You were a minister in his government, you're a cabinet minister in this government, you're a senior member, and according to Kristina Keneally, you're a future Prime Minister. What are your views? What are your views?
Everyone's just turned off now, Kristina.
What are your views on this? I mean, Tony Abbott horse traded on guns, and he's now done a tweet seemingly targeted at Malcolm Turnbull for potentially horse trading on guns.
Well, my view is there should never be horse trading on gun laws.
But there
The
was
reason
when you
why
were a minister. There was when you were an Abbott
look, I
government
haven't
minister.
heard Tony, but Peter, you're asking me to take your characterisation of that. I haven't heard Tony Abbott say that he
said
horse
in
traded on
exchange
guns.
for. He said we will make the following amendment on guns, and then his words, which Laura J's read out, were in exchange for, and then he went on to go. Now, if that's not horse trading, what is?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, we need the strongest gun laws possible. They should never be traded on another policy issue. We need strong gun laws because the security of our families and of our community is something which is more important than anything else. And if you look at the experience in other communities like in the United States, where they've had weaker gun laws, it's led to disastrous and horrible and very painful actions. And John Howard, who led the charge in very difficult circumstances here in Australia, has been heralded for the leadership that he's shown, something that Tony Abbott and Malcolm Turnbull are continuing.
Josh Frydenberg, before we let you go, we'll end on a lighter note. This morning, you smashed it out on the basketball court. We've got some photos. You, Ed Husick, and the MPs taking on the Parliamentary Press Gallery. I believe we have the photos. We're about to see them.
Oh, please take it down as quickly as possible. Wait, what is that? Lycra tights. And more importantly, a double-handed three-point shot. What's that all about?
Coming down, Josh Frydenberg, to teach you to shoot. There's Ed Husick.
And did you see Jim Chalmers there? Jim Chalmers there looking on. You know, we're on the same team this morning. That's a good sign.
Yeah.
You guys are a good team. You would have won, I assume.
We actually lost. David Spears came to the gallery's rescue and they got there by 2 points over us. So, you know, never let it be said that the gallery are Muppets on the basketball court. They weren't this morning.
Is there nothing David Spears can't do? That man is amazing.
Can you say he came to their rescue? What, he looks like Swan in there at half-time just to take control of proceedings? Sounds like what he does here at Sky News.
He gritted his teeth and he was under the basket at every opportunity. But it has to be said, Ed Husick, Michael Suker and Jim Chalmers and many others on the Ed Sezelsa on the coalition side showed a clean pair of heels on the court this morning, and we're all good sports about it.
It is nice to see that every now and again, even if it's only in a sporting context, you can all work together. Josh Frydenberg, thanks for your company.
Exactly.
Cheers.
Good to be with you guys.